Well, we are so thrilled to have both of you here. We are so proud to work with both of your incredible organizations, and I'm so excited to hear the two of you, talk about your organizations and also, about some of the concepts that we just heard Melanie and her guests talking about and how they play out in your organization. So, to start out, I want to have you both introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about the missions of your organizations for anybody who's not so familiar. Claire, will you start us off?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you again for having us today. So I'm Claire Reichenbach. I'm the CEO of the James Beard Foundation. We're a leading nonprofit in the food world, probably best known for the annual awards and the dining events we hold here in New York City and around the country. But fundamentally, everything we do is in support of a more diverse, equitable, and sustainable food world and a thriving independent restaurant industry. And our mission is good food for good.
Amazing. And Nada, will you introduce the Global Heritage Fund?
Thank you, Kristen. Good to be with you here and with Claire as well. Global Heritage Fund is an organization that was established about 2 decades ago with the aim to positively transform communities through cultural heritage preservation. And since our founding, we developed and financed projects in 28 heritage sites in 19 countries around the world. We do not work in the United States. All of our projects currently are in the developing world.
Amazing. And I think, this summit is all about strategy for 2021, and 2020 has clearly been a year of just adapting for everyone. So tell me a little bit about how you've shifted your focus this year and how things have changed. Nada, we'll start with you. And I know we have some images for both of you, so I'll share those as well.
Sure. When COVID happened, I mean, we're an international organization and we rely on travel, on sending teams to these places, even in terms of fundraising. A lot of our donors and sponsors travel with us to see these places, meet the communities that they support, and so on. So it was a bit challenging in the beginning, but then we pivoted, we shifted our focus quickly to support the communities that are essentially the carers for these places. We needed to step up and show that we care and show them that we are there for them. We had to kind of like balance and prioritize which projects was going to get the most attention from us, and worked from there in terms of developing short-term strategy to respond, which was identifying what the need of each community and responding accordingly. And the second part is, and we're still working through it right now, is looking into a resiliency program that enable these communities to continue to thrive and also, continue to support the preservation and protection of these beautiful places around the world.
Absolutely. And Claire, how have you all shifted this year?
Well, tactically, we've shifted. Much of our activity has been in person in terms of events, educating, fundraising activity. We've had to shift all of that to virtual, as you can imagine. But more strategically, we've reorientated all of our focus to support the industry get through this. As you heard from Gail, the independent restaurant industry is being devastated by the multiple crises this year. We launched a campaign called Open for Good, which is really to redirect all our energy, team, resource focus to help our industry get through this, to survive, stabilize, and then to build back better, to address the inequities and vulnerabilities we've seen exposed during these crises. And from a kind of visual perspective, we've gone from depicting these celebratory events and dinners to really telling the human story, the viewpoint from the individual, and really anchoring these individual independent restaurants in their communities. You can see from some of these images, Kristen.
Exactly, and that was going to be my next question. How does this shift play out in your visual content, and how does it affect the types of stories that you're telling and the imagery that you're sharing, Claire?
So as I said, we've gone from kind of events to these human stories. And as we've shifted from physical to virtual, the visual storytelling is just increasingly important, and being able to convey complex messages in powerful, compelling images is really what is required. A lot of what our focus on is encouraging consumer support of independent restaurants. So encouraging takeout, encouraging delivery, encouraging being a responsible diner, and also a lot around supporting minority communities who have been disproportionately impacted a lot over the summer in terms of Black-owned restaurant businesses. And as you can see, we have a current campaign right now, which is about saving Chinese restaurants in support, in partnership with Grace Young. So really highlighting again the experiences of the individuals. We've also done a lot around advocacy. Gail was talking about the Restaurant Act, which is a critical piece of legislation need for federal relief for the community. And again, depicting the value, the social, economic, and cultural value of independent restaurants through visuals has been a core part of those efforts and endeavors.
Absolutely. And Nada, how about for you all? How has this shift played out in your visual content?
Well, the first thing that we did was launching a solidarity campaign, as I've mentioned, and that solidarity campaign enabled us to do targeted campaign for each place where we work at. And the first place was Colombia, at an archaeological site that was devastatedly impacted by the lack of tourism. There's a lot of indigenous communities around these places, and the whole tourism industry, just like the restaurant industry, has taken a hit. So we decided that we will help them in the short term with PPE and staple food, because they're so remote and they isolated themselves not to get infected. And the visuals that we shared with our donors and our community are moving images. They're images of us delivering food, our teams delivering food, delivering PPE, being with the community. We also needed to show that, we are taking the precautions, because we don't want these places to get infected if they are not already. We wanted to make sure that anything that we bring in is sanitized and clean and so on. So a lot of the content that we were sharing with in our emails and social media was active content, content that enables people not to look at static images, but at images that connect them to these communities that need their help.
Great. And I know, this is a strategy summit. It's all about looking ahead to 2021. We're also headed into the end of the year, which is a huge time for nonprofits with end of the year appeals. And I'm curious, what's on your mind as you're planning for your organization's year ahead, as you're thinking about sharing your story with donors, with your community, with your different stakeholders? What are you all thinking about? What's top of mind? Nada, we'll start with you.
I think donors want to connect, and the way they connected before the pandemic was to go to these places and meet people and eat with them and get to know them and so on. I think it's very important to enable them to connect still, although remotely. And to do so, you need to show people's faces. You need to show people's, I think I was listening to the session with ESPN, and it was great to hear them talk about how stage photos are not going to work. You need to show a little bit of action, a little bit of movement, people doing things, people, for instance, we work with women in China on textiles, showing them how they do that, showing them how the process of making these things. And also giving them a little bit of hope that one day they will be able to travel again and they will be able to see these fascinating places.
Absolutely. And Claire, how about for you as you're heading into 2021?
Well, I mean, we've again been talking about the Restaurants Act. I think we even if we have a big injection of federal financial relief, the challenges for the year ahead for the independent restaurant community are immense. So it's been single-minded about telling those stories and keeping I
think she froze.
We might have lost Claire for a second. Hopefully she'll be back in 1 second. There she is. Hi, Claire. Okay, we lost you for 1 second, so I'll let you take it from the top there.
Okay, so I was just saying, we've been talking about the Restaurant Act. We think even if, and we trust that the federal relief will be passed, but we know looking ahead for 21, the challenges for the restaurant industry will continue to be immense. So our focus is really about keeping that top of mind and being very single-minded in terms of our Open for Good campaign and all that we do. We believe that food continues to be a powerful on-ramp for these messages. It is a uniter. So we will continue to use those visuals to bring people into the story of the community. But I think increasingly it's about recognizing the stories of the people behind the food, and again the humanity behind the food in the restaurants. Gail talked about sharing the mic. I think we'll be doing more of that. We have a strong platform. Our social platform combined reaches over 1 million audiences. So using that platform to spotlight new voices and to give platform to new stories and unheard voices. So that's a lot of going to be the focus for us for 21.
Amazing. I love listening to the two of you, and I think both of your organizations really are bringing a lot of hope to our community during this time. So I really can't thank you enough for sharing your perspectives with us. As other people are listening and planning their strategies, what's your #1 takeaway for other nonprofits, other business leaders, as they're thinking about their creative strategies for 2021? What's your #1 piece of advice? And let's see, Claire, we'll start with you this time.
I think it's about having a growing comfort for ambiguity and not having all the answers, and being able to change direction with some fleet of foot. So really anchoring in one's mission and values, and recognizing though that may have different expression and different manifestation based on the environmental changes. I think having a brain trust of people around you who can help support that rapid decision making is also vitally important. But I think it's about not being rigid, but having the flexibility to move. And I hate the word pivot, it's overused, but to pivot quickly.
Yeah, we were thinking, how many times are we going to hear that word today? So many already. So I think it's going to keep happening. I think our later sessions are actually called pivoting. So we'll see how that goes. Nada, how about for you?
I wholeheartedly agree with Claire. I mean, one thing that I learned during this pandemic is that you need to plan, but you also need to pivot, and pivot quickly, using that term. It's just, you don't know what's next. So yes, it's planning and thinking in terms of long-term strategy, but also being nimble enough and being quick enough in just shifting gears when you need to. And I think, even in terms, I mean, in our sector, images tend to be static a little bit because it's monuments, it's sites, but all of those places have so many people living around them that make them alive, and that needs to be highlighted. I had to add pictures of food so I can compare with Claire. And it's, you know, food is what unites people. Food is part of cultures. Food is what makes us understand other cultures. So I think looking at just a static site and thinking about preservation of just the built heritage is not enough. We need to also go beyond that and look at all of these beautiful things that people around these places are producing and changing as well.
And the good thing from a creative strategy perspective is actually many of these food images are evergreen to some extent, so they can be deployed in different guises. So there's some benefit to that.
Absolutely true. And I think we'll be, you know, seeing the lessons of 2020 well into 2021 and beyond. So I think it's really great for, you know, all the creative teams on this call to hear this advice from both of you. I wanted to give you both a chance to ask a question of each other. If either of you has a quick question for the other, Nada or Claire, either one have a quick question?
And Nada, I mean, you've been talking about this, you know, food is such a profound cultural pillar and cultural expression, and a core part of your work when you're thinking about heritage. I'd just love to hear a bit more in terms of that dimension of your work, and maybe you could take one project to highlight the kind of the sustainable element of that, and how nurture of the communities around through food are part of that dimension.
Well, a lot of places. I mean, for instance, this picture that Kristen is showing, it's in a tiny little village in southwest China, and I hope one day I can take you both there. It's a beautiful rustic village, and food just links the whole community together. They do everything together, and it's such a beautiful thing. A lot of these communities, they're not cash wealthy, they're cash poor. So what they have are the resources, and they use their resources in a way that is very sustainable, that enables them to have them last for a long time. In Morocco, it's the same thing. We're working on the preservation of granaries. Granaries store food, they store grains. They're important for these communities that are, using them as a communal place to save the grain, but also a sacred place. Because food, there is a sacred nature to food.
Question.
And
Without
sorry?
question.
Yeah, there's a sacred nature to food. So we are preserving the built, but we also want to highlight the intangible things that make culture vibrant and make it survive and make it, it's good for our mental health. Actually, there was a study done in Europe where cultural heritage in these buildings and these places are spaces that imbue a certain amount of, well-being. So they are important to preserve, but also everything that happens around them is important to preserve, including restaurants, which is, being here in San Francisco, where the restaurant culture is big, and it's devastating to see all of our favorite places closed and not able to open at capacity, and chefs are struggling. So yeah, you're doing amazing work, Claire. Keep it up.
Likewise. Thank you.